The first night I worked the night shift at Harlow Psychiatric Center, a patient told me something I have never been able to forget. He said, "The man standing behind you has been there for 3 hours." I turned around. There was no one there, but I felt something. A coldness at my back that had no business being there in a heated building in the middle of November. His name was Gerald, 62 years old, former schoolteacher. He had been admitted 6 weeks earlier after his wife called the police because he had barricaded himself in his bathroom, screaming that something was living in the walls. When officers arrived, he was sitting on the bathroom floor, perfectly calm, holding a flashlight. He told them he had found a way to keep it away. He would not say what it was. Gerald was not violent. He was not delusional in the way most patients were. He held conversations. He answered questions clearly. He remembered details about his life with sharp precision. The only thing that made him a patient and not a visitor was what happened every night at 2:47 a.m. I found out about it on my third night. I was doing rounds, clipboard in hand, flashlight cutting through the dim corridor. The ward was quiet. Most patients slept, some murmured. A few stared at the ceiling with the kind of emptiness that made me uncomfortable in ways I could not explain. When I reached room 9, I stopped. Gerald was not in his bed. He was standing in the corner of the room, facing the wall. His hands were flat against the plaster. His forehead was pressed to the surface. He was not moving. I called his name once, quietly, the way you speak to someone who might be sleepwalking. He did not answer. I stepped inside. That was when I noticed he was whispering. I moved closer. His lips were barely moving, but I could catch fragments. Numbers, mostly. Long strings of numbers, spoken in a slow, careful rhythm. Then something that was not numbers at all. Something that sounded less like language and more like the absence of it. A low, wet sound that came from somewhere inside his chest. "Gerald," I said again, louder. He stopped. His hands dropped from the wall. He turned slowly, and his expression was entirely normal. Tired, maybe. Slightly confused, the way a person looks when they have just woken up. "You should go stand in the hallway," he said calmly. "It doesn't like new faces." I asked him what he meant. He looked past me, toward the door. "When I stop talking to it, it goes looking for someone else to watch." I wrote the incident in the overnight log as a routine sleepwalking episode. I did not know what else to call it. The following week, I started noticing something about the security footage from the hallway outside room 9. Every morning when I reviewed the overnight recordings, there was a gap. Not static, not corruption, just 17 minutes of footage where the timestamp continued running, but the image showed nothing. Pure black, as if someone had placed a hand over the lens. It happened every night at 2:47 a.m. I showed it to the head nurse. She stared at the screen for a long time and then told me the cameras in that section of the building had always been unreliable. She said it without looking at me. Gerald was discharged 3 months later. His wife had convinced the doctor he was stable enough to return home. I saw him on his last day, sitting in the common room with a cup of tea. He looked healthy, rested. He smiled when he saw me. As I turned to leave, he called my name. "I told it to leave you alone, but now that I'm going, I don't know who it'll pick." He left at noon. That night at 2:47 a.m., I was doing rounds when I stopped walking for no reason I could name. I was standing outside a room I had passed 100 times before, room 12, a patient I had never had any problems with. I heard whispering from inside, long strings of numbers, and then a sound that was not language at all. I stood in that hallway for a long time. I never opened the door. I wrote nothing in the log. But when I reviewed the footage the next morning, there was a gap in the recording from the camera outside room 12. 17 minutes. Timestamp running. Screen completely black. Gerald never came back. The hospital closed that ward 2 years later due to structural concerns. They cited moisture in the walls, cracks in the plaster. The maintenance crew that went in to do the initial inspection refused to continue after the first day. Their report mentioned a smell they could not identify and markings on the interior wall of room 9. long strings of numbers carved into the plaster with something sharp. No one has ever explained them.
Nobody on the staff wanted to be assigned to Miriam. Not because she was dangerous. She never raised her voice. She never tried to leave. She sat by the window of her room every single day, watching the parking lot below with the patience of someone who was waiting for something specific to arrive. The reason nobody wanted her was simpler than that. It was something about the way she looked at you when the lights went low. Miriam was admitted after a neighbor found her standing in her front yard at 4 in the morning, barefoot, facing the tree line behind the houses. She was holding a kitchen knife, not in a threatening way, but pointed outward, blade facing the dark between the trees. When the neighbor called her name, Miriam turned around and said very quietly, "It's already too late to help me, but thank you for coming." She was 50 years old, a retired librarian, no history of mental illness, no family history either. Her husband had died 2 years prior of a heart attack, and neighbors described her as quiet but functional, someone who kept her garden, returned library books, and waved when she passed you on the street. Whatever changed her happened in the months after her husband's funeral, and she never explained it to anyone directly. During the day, Miriam was nearly invisible on the ward. She ate when food was brought to her. She showered without being reminded. She answered questions with short, accurate responses. When the psychiatrist asked how she was feeling, she said, "Observed." Every single session, that was her word. Not anxious, not sad, observed. I worked the overnight shift, and I was the one who first documented what the day staff had apparently grown so used to that it no longer alarmed them. At night, Miriam talked. Not to herself exactly, not in the way a confused patient mutters or a frightened one cries. She spoke clearly in full sentences at a moderate volume, as if she were holding a conversation with someone seated across from her. I pressed my ear to her door the first time I heard it. She was describing the ward, the hallway, the nurse's station. She described it in real time with accurate details. The clipboard on the desk, the coffee cup with the chipped handle, the way the fluorescent light at the end of the hall flickered every 40 seconds. She was narrating my surroundings to someone I could not see. I opened the door. She was alone, sitting on the edge of her bed, hands folded in her lap, staring at the wall. She turned and looked at me with no surprise on her face. "You heard me," she said. I asked who she was talking to. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It followed me here. I've been trying to keep it focused on me so it doesn't wander." I asked what she meant by wander. "It finds a person," she said carefully, like she had explained this before and knew no one had believed her. "And it watches, and when it's done watching, it looks for someone new, somewhere close, someone who doesn't know to expect it." I wrote it in the log as a dissociative episode. I used the correct clinical language, but I did not sleep when I got home that morning, and I did not know why until I was lying in the dark and realized I had been listening for the sound of breathing that was not mine. Miriam's case was reviewed by 3 different psychiatrists over the following months. Each one arrived at a different diagnosis. None of them agreed. One of them, a man who had worked in psychiatry for 27 years, submitted a report that was 3 pages long and ended with a single sentence that the hospital administration later asked him to remove. I saw the original before it was edited. The sentence read, "I cannot rule out that the patient's perception of surveillance is accurate." Miriam was transferred to a long-term facility 18 months after her initial admission. On her last night, I did rounds as usual. Her room was quiet. She was lying in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. As I pulled her door closed, she spoke without looking at me. "You should put something against your bedroom door tonight. It gets curious about new places." I drove home. I locked my door. I sat on my couch until the sun came up. 3 weeks later, my neighbor knocked on my door to ask if I had heard anything unusual the night before. She said she woke up at around 3 in the morning with the feeling that someone was in her room, standing near the bed, just standing there in the dark. She found nothing, but her dog, which had slept at the foot of her bed every night for 6 years, refused to enter the bedroom again. It has been 2 years. The dog still sleeps in the hallway.
When Marcus arrived at the unit, he was carrying nothing. No bag, no phone, no wallet. Just the clothes on his back and a collection of drawings stuffed into the front pocket of his jeans. 31 drawings, all on the same type of receipt paper, all depicting the same face. We did not know about the drawings until intake. The admitting nurse found them and placed them in an evidence bag, the way we did with anything a patient brought in. She set the bag on the counter and went to get the attending physician. When she came back, the drawings had been removed from the bag and spread out across the counter in a line. No one admitted to moving them. Marcus was 29, a graduate student in mathematics. His roommate had called emergency services after finding him sitting in the middle of his bedroom floor, surrounded by hundreds of pieces of paper, all drawings, all the same face. He had been there for at least 2 days without eating or sleeping. When paramedics spoke to him, he responded normally. He was not frightened. He was, by every account, very calm. The only thing he said that unsettled the paramedics was his response when they asked what he had been drawing. "I'm trying to get it exactly right," he said, "before it realizes I've noticed it." The face in the drawings was not a face that belonged to any style or imagination you would call artistic. It was precise, clinical almost. The proportions were accurate in the way that a technical illustration is accurate, not beautiful, but correct. It had no defining features that made it individual. It looked like a face stripped of personality, a face that existed only to look back at you. On Marcus's second night in the ward, I found him at the narrow window in his room, pressing his drawings one by one against the glass and holding them there for a few seconds before moving to the next. I asked what he was doing. "Checking," he said, "to see if the reflection matches." I looked at the window. At that angle, at that hour, the glass reflected the room back to us. There was Marcus, there was me, and behind us, the open door and the dark hallway beyond. I asked what he meant by matching. He turned and looked at me with an expression I could only describe as pity, not for himself, for me. "You've been walking past it every night," he said, "at the end of the hallway, near the utility closet. It stands there and watches the nurse's station." I did not turn around immediately. I do not know why. Some part of my brain processed what he said and decided, without my permission, that I did not want to look at the hallway behind me. When I did turn, there was nothing there. The hallway was empty. The utility closet was closed, as it always was at night. But the motion sensor light at the far end of the hall, which only activated when something passed within 8 feet of it, was on. I watched it for 30 seconds. It turned off. Nothing had passed. I reviewed the footage from that camera the next morning. The camera activated 17 times over the course of one night. The camera captured nothing that should have triggered it. No staff, no patient, no equipment, nothing. Marcus asked for paper and a pencil on his 4th day. Standard practice was to allow it. He spent the entire day drawing. By evening, he had produced 40 new drawings, all the same face. Except these were different in one specific way that I noticed and that no one else on staff seemed to find significant. In every new drawing, the face had been given a location, a background, a context. A hallway, a nurse's station, a corridor with a utility closet on the left side. Ours. He was drawing our ward, and he was placing the face inside it. Marcus was discharged after a 6-week evaluation period.
His psychiatrist concluded that the drawing behavior was a coping mechanism related to anxiety and sleep deprivation. The report was clean and clinical and explained everything in language that made perfect sense. I kept one of the drawings. I do not know why I took it. I told myself it was for documentation purposes. I put it in the drawer of my desk at home. A month later, I was cleaning and found it face down. I had not placed it face down. I lived alone. There was no one else in my apartment who could have touched it. I turned it over. Marcus had drawn the face with no background, no location, no context. But someone, in very faint pencil strokes that I had not noticed before, had added something behind the face. A bedroom, a desk, a person sleeping. The room in the drawing looked exactly like mine.
The first thing Thomas asked when he was admitted was how thick the walls were. Not in the way a man asks about privacy or noise, in the way a man asks about shelter. He was 38, an audio engineer. His sister had admitted him after he stopped sleeping for 11 days. By the time he arrived, he had covered every window in his apartment with towels and stuffed rolled fabric under every door. His sister described his apartment as almost completely silent. She said it felt wrong, the silence, like the quiet you get in a room where something bad has happened and everyone is too afraid to speak. Thomas was thin and dark-eyed and moved with the careful deliberateness of a person who was trying very hard not to make noise. He sat through his intake interview with both hands flat on his thighs. When the doctor asked him to describe his symptoms, he said, "It listens for me. If I make sound, it finds me faster." He said nothing else about it during that first session. I learned the rest over the following weeks, in pieces, the way you learn anything real, gradually and never completely. Thomas believed that something had been living in his apartment building for approximately 4 months before his admission. He could not describe what it was, only what it did. It moved through the building between 1 and 4 a.m. It had no pattern to its path, except that it stopped outside rooms where there was sound, voices, televisions, the noise of someone shifting in their sleep. He had started tracking it by listening. He could identify it by the change in the air pressure in the hallway outside his door, a subtle thing, a pressure drop followed by silence so complete it hurt your ears. He said that before he understood what it was, he thought he was going insane. Then he started timing the intervals between the sounds that preceded it, a distant creak, a shift somewhere in the structure of the building, and he realized the intervals were shortening. It was getting closer to his apartment. I asked him what happened when it reached his door. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "Nothing. If you're perfectly still, if you don't breathe too loud, don't let anything in the room make sound, it eventually moves on." He had managed 11 days of that before his body gave out. On Thomas's 3rd night in the ward, the hallway outside the patient rooms went silent in a way that I noticed before I understood why I noticed it. Sound is constant in a psychiatric ward at night. The soft noise of climate systems, footsteps, the low hum of equipment. There is always something. For approximately 3 minutes, there was nothing. I was at the nurse's station. I stopped writing. I listened. The silence had a texture to it, a density that was different from ordinary quiet. It pressed against my ears. Then, from the far end of the corridor came the faintest sound, a change in air, a pressure shift I felt more than heard. The light at the end of the hall came on. I stood up. The light went off. No one had passed. Thomas's call light activated at that moment. I walked to his room and cracked the door. He was sitting up in bed, perfectly still, both hands flat on his thighs exactly as they had been during intake. His eyes were fixed on the wall near the door. He held up one hand, palm toward me. "Don't move." I stood in the doorway for 47 seconds. I needed them to hold on to.
Then the pressure lifted. Sound came back. The climate system hummed. A patient murmured somewhere down the hall. Thomas exhaled slowly. "It was in the hallway," he said. "I think it came from your building." I did not know what to say to that. "The intervals in here are shorter than they were at home," he added. "I've been counting. Whatever is in this building, it's not moving through a whole neighborhood anymore." He looked at me for the first time. "It's staying close." Thomas was discharged with a diagnosis of severe anxiety disorder. His sister drove him home. Before he left, he told me something and made me promise not to dismiss it. He said that in the 4 days since the silence in the hallway, he had been timing the intervals again, between the pressure drops, between the moments when the air changed. They had shortened to 8 minutes. Whatever it was, he said, it was not leaving with him. I have worked the night shift in this building for 6 years. I have never once heard the silence Thomas described, not before that night. Since that night, I have heard it 4 times. I have started counting the seconds between sounds. The intervals are getting shorter.
Ward C was supposed to be empty. It had been closed for 3 months pending renovation. The rooms were stripped, the beds were gone. The nursing station sat dark behind its sliding glass partition, and the hallway lights had been switched to emergency only, bathing the whole corridor in that low, sickly amber that made everything look wrong. I was the only staff member who went down there regularly. Part of my overnight rounds included a walkthrough of the closed sections, a liability thing, a check to confirm no one had wandered in. I had done it 50 times without incident. The 51st time, I found a patient. She was sitting on the floor of room C7, back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest. She was wearing a hospital gown from our ward, standard issue, faded blue. She was looking at the door when I arrived, as if she had known I was coming. She was maybe 40 years old, dark hair, gray at the temples. She was completely calm. I asked her name. She said Eleanor. I asked how she had gotten into Ward C. She said she walked. Our ward was on the 3rd floor. Ward C was on the 1st. The stairwell between them required a key card at 2 separate points. The elevator also required staff authorization after midnight. Eleanor had no key card. She had no identification on her at all. When I walked her back to the main ward and checked our system, there was no patient named Eleanor on any current admission list. She had not been admitted to our facility. She was not supposed to be there at all. Protocol was to contact the attending physician, hold the individual, and attempt to identify them. That is what I did. The attending came down, spoke with Eleanor for 40 minutes, and came out of the room looking the way doctors sometimes do when something has not gone the way they expected. He told me she was responsive, coherent, and not presenting any immediate psychiatric symptoms. He also told me she refused to answer any questions about where she had come from or how she had entered the building. She had, however, told him something that he was documenting as part of her file. She had told him she was trying to get away from something that was following her. She refused to describe it. She would only say that she had been running from it for 3 days and that she had wandered into our building because it was the only place on the street where the lights were on all night. She said she thought it did not like light. Eleanor was given a temporary hold while her identity was checked. She was placed in room 14. I did my rounds at 2 a.m., and her room was quiet, light under the door, everything normal. At 3:15 a.m., the light under her door went out. Not the overhead light, all of them. The room went dark. Her call light did not activate. I did not hear her voice. I heard nothing. I opened the door. She was standing in the center of the room, facing the window. The window faced the street 4 floors down. She was pressing both palms flat to the glass. Her forehead was resting against it. Her breath fogged the surface. "It's outside," she said without turning around. I looked past her. The street below was empty.
the amber glow of the streetlights reflected off wet pavement. Nothing moved. "It's been out there since I came in," she said. "It's waiting." I asked how she knew. She turned around. Her face in the dark was difficult to read, but her voice was steady. She was not frightened. She was something past frightened. "Because it's patient," she said. "That's the thing about it. It doesn't rush. It just waits. And every time I move, it moves a little closer. And every time I stop, it stops. And it watches. And eventually—" She stopped. "Eventually what?" I asked. She turned back to the window. "Eventually, you run out of places with the lights on all night." Eleanor was gone by morning. Not escaped, that was the word the day staff used. Escaped, as if it had been sudden and dramatic. But I had checked her room at 5 a.m., and she was there. I checked again at 5:40 a.m., and the room was empty. The bed had not been slept in. Her gown was folded neatly on the chair. The keycard logs showed no exits during that window. The security camera in the hallway outside room 14 showed Eleanor's door closed and undisturbed for the entire duration. There is no record of how she left. But I reviewed the exterior camera footage that morning, the one that covers the front entrance and the street. At 5:22 a.m., in the amber pool beneath the last working streetlight, something changed. A shadow that had no source. A shape that did not correspond to any object or person visible in the frame. It was there for 11 seconds. Then it moved. It moved in the direction Eleanor had gone. I have never filed a report about this. I don't have the language for it. I still do my rounds. I still walk the closed sections. I still check the rooms. I have started leaving the lights on in every room I enter. I don't turn them off when I leave.